The crystal chandeliers of the Vandermeer Hotel ballroom fractured light across 500 faces, worth more than Belle Hartley would earn in 10 lifetimes. She moved through the crowd like smoke invisible in her black server's uniform, carrying champagne that cost more per bottle than her monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on her. Surrounded by abundance while her stomach cramped with hunger, she'd ignored for 3 days straight. Belle had learned the art of disappearing in spaces like this. As a last-minute hire through a catering agency desperate for warm bodies, she wasn't supposed to exist beyond her function. Offer drinks, clear empties, smile when acknowledged, vanish when not. The same survival skills that carried her through 3 years at Ashworth Academy on scholarships and student loans, working every available shift while trust fund classmates complained about the inauthenticity of their conceptual pieces. The gala blurred into designer gowns and tailored tuxedos, conversations conducted in that particular tone of casual wealth where six-figure donations were discussed with the energy most people reserved for coffee orders. Belle had stopped listening hours ago. Another charity. Another cause. Another opportunity for Manhattan's elite to congratulate themselves on their generosity while she stood on aching feet counting minutes until she could collect her cash payment and sleep for 12 uninterrupted hours. She'd been upright for 6 hours when the room started tilting at the edges. Belle blinked hard, trying to clear the gray spots creeping into her peripheral vision. Not now, not here. She couldn't afford to lose this gig. The agency paid cash at night's end and she needed every dollar. Student loan payment 3 weeks overdue. Landlord leaving pointed notes under her door. Rationing ramen and whatever free food she could scavenge from campus events. The mathematics of poverty were relentless. Every dollar spent on food was a dollar not going toward rent. Every hour at a catering job was an hour not in her studio, not working on the portfolio that was supposed to be her ticket to something better. But portfolios didn't pay bills. Dreams didn't fill empty stomachs. Champagne Belle offered her tray to a cluster of women dripping diamonds, their laughter sharp as broken glass. One took a flute without looking at Belle's face, without acknowledging her existence. It was a particular skill of the wealthy she'd noticed. The ability to accept service while rendering the server functionally invisible. She'd grown up middle class in a Pennsylvania suburb, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse. Comfortable enough, but nothing like this. Nothing that prepared her for how New York could swallow you whole if you didn't have money as armor. Her parents had been so proud when she got into Ashworth's prestigious program. They'd helped as much as they could, but were stretched thin themselves now, facing retirement with inadequate savings. Belle wouldn't ask for more. Couldn't. This was her dream. Her choice to pursue art in the most expensive city in America. If she couldn't make it work, that failure was hers alone. The room swayed again. Belle steadied herself against a marble column, the stone cool beneath her palm. When had she eaten last? Really eaten, not just coffee and the stale bagel someone left in the break room yesterday morning, the day before. Time had started blurring together lately, measured only in shifts and deadlines and the constant grinding anxiety of not having enough. "Miss, are you supposed to be standing there?" A severe woman in an event coordinator's headset glared at Belle with undisguised irritation. "The North Terrace needs service. Why are you hovering?" "I'm sorry. I was just—" "Move. Now." Belle moved, threading back through the crowd with her tray held high, champagne glasses trembling slightly with the tremor in her hands. The North Terrace. She could make it to the North Terrace. Just a little longer and the event would end, and she could take the subway home and sleep, and maybe tomorrow things would feel less impossible. The crowd pressed closer. Conversation rose to a dull roar in her ears. Belle's vision darkened at the edges, cleared, darkened again. Her heart raced while her limbs felt heavy, disconnected. She knew these symptoms. Her body running on fumes, pushed past limits that shouldn't be pushed. But what choice existed? No safety net, no family wealth, no trust fund waiting in the wings, only forward, only the next step, only the desperate mathematics of survival. 3 yards from the terrace doors, her knee buckled. The tray tilted, champagne glasses sliding. Belle tried to catch herself, but her legs had stopped obeying commands. The marble floor rushed up hard and unforgiving, and she had just enough time to think, this is going to hurt, before arms caught her. Strong arms, expensive fabric, the scent of cedar and something darker, more dangerous. Belle's tray clattered across marble champagne and shattered crystal scattering, but she didn't fall. Someone had caught her mid-collapse, was holding her with a steadiness that felt surreal against the chaos of her failing body. "I've got you." The voice was low-controlled, edged with something that might have been concern, but felt more like command. "Don't try to stand." Belle's vision swam the ballroom, kaleidoscoping into fragments of light and shadow. She was aware of sudden silence falling over the nearby crowd, aware of whispers rising like smoke, but she couldn't make sense of any of it. Her mind felt stuffed with cotton thoughts moving through molasses. Someone get medical assistance. Now. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried absolute authority, the kind that made a room full of Manhattan's elite snap to attention. Belle felt herself being shifted, gathered more securely against a broad chest. Some distant part of her brain registered that she should probably be embarrassed, should be apologizing for the disruption, for the broken glasses, for existing too visibly in a space where she was meant to be invisible. But she was so tired, so impossibly bone-deep tired. "Stay with me." The command was gentler now, a hand cupping the back of her head with surprising care. "Keep your eyes open. Look at me." Belle tried. She managed to focus on the face above hers. Strong jaw, dark eyes that seemed to see straight through all her carefully constructed defenses, a mouth set in a line of intense concentration. Handsome, she registered dimly. Dangerously handsome in a way that had nothing to do with symmetry and everything to do with raw presence. "What's your name?" The question came from far away, but Belle found herself answering automatically. "Lena. Lena Hartley." She didn't correct it, too exhausted to explain that everyone called her Belle, that Isabel was reserved for official documents and her mother's rare moments of exasperation. "When did you last eat?" Lena Belle blinked slowly, trying to remember. Yesterday, maybe." Something flickered across his expression. Anger, she thought, but not directed at her. Yesterday. It wasn't a question. He turned his head slightly, addressing someone Belle couldn't see. "Where the hell is the medic, sir? They're coming, but perhaps we should—" "I'm not putting her down until someone competent examines her." The absurdity of the situation started penetrating through Belle's fog. She was being held in the arms of a stranger in the middle of a Manhattan gala, having just destroyed an entire tray of expensive champagne, and he was refusing to let her go. This wasn't how these events were supposed to proceed. Staff didn't collapse, guests didn't catch them, and people definitely didn't speak with the kind of authority that made a room full of New York's elite fall silent and attentive. "I'm okay." Belle's voice came out thread-thin and weak. "I should get back to work. I'm so sorry about the glasses." "You're not going anywhere." The man holding her shifted his grip slightly, one arm more securely beneath her knees, the other supporting her shoulders. "And you're sure as hell not apologizing for passing out from hunger." The bluntness of his words, the accuracy of his assessment made heat flood Belle's face despite her exhaustion. She wasn't used to being seen this clearly, having her circumstances laid bare without euphemism or polite fiction. A woman in a medic's uniform appeared at his elbow, professional and efficient. "Sir, if you could lay her down, here's fine." He didn't move, didn't relinquish his hold. "Check her out thoroughly." The medic's eyes flickered with something. Surprise, respect, fear. But she immediately began her assessment, checking Belle's pulse, her eyes asking questions about medical history and symptoms, while Belle answered as best she could through the fog clouding her thoughts. "Blood pressure is low. Pulse weak. Classic signs of malnutrition and dehydration." The medic's voice was carefully neutral, but Belle caught the edge of professional concern. "She needs fluids, food, and rest. I'd recommend taking her to the ER for a full workup." "No." Belle tried to sit up, panic cutting through exhaustion. "No, I can't afford. I don't have insurance that covers emergency room visits. You need medical attention." The man's voice cut through her protest with absolute finality. "Cost is irrelevant. Cost is not irrelevant. Frustration gave Belle a burst of energy. Cost is everything. I can't just... Who are you anyway? Why do you even care? He looked at her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Then slowly something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the edges of all that controlled intensity. Dominic Steele. And right now I care because you're in my arms and you can barely hold your head up. Everything else can wait. Steele. The name echoed through Belle's foggy awareness, carrying weight she couldn't quite place. Around them the crowd had begun to disperse, conversations resuming in hushed tones, but there was still a circle of space around them, as if people were afraid to get too close. Mr. Steele, if we could just... The event coordinator had reappeared, her earlier irritation replaced by obsequious concern. I apologize for the disruption. We'll handle our staff member's situation and ensure everything is cleaned up immediately. Your staff member has a name. Dominic's voice dropped to a temperature that made the coordinator take an involuntary step back. And she's being handled by me. Make sure there's a car waiting at the east entrance. Immediately. Of course, sir. Right away. The coordinator fled, speaking urgently into her headset. Dominic finally moved, carrying Belle toward the ballroom's side exit with the kind of easy strength that suggested her weight was nothing to him. The medic followed, still monitoring Belle with professional efficiency, though she seemed distinctly nervous about contradicting anything Dominic said. I really can walk. Belle's protest came out weaker than intended. This is insane. You don't just carry around people you don't know. I do tonight. Dominic navigated through a service corridor away from the main event. And you can walk when you've got food in your stomach and color back in your face. Until then, stop arguing. Stop arguing. You can't just... I can. He glanced down at her, and for the first time there was a hint of dark humor in his expression. And I am. Get used to it. They emerged into a private corridor, thick carpet muffling footsteps, artwork on the walls that Belle's trained eye immediately recognized as original and worth more than her entire education. A sleek black car was already waiting at a discreet side entrance, a driver holding the door open with professional impassivity. Dominic settled Belle into the back seat with unexpected gentleness, then turned to the medic. I need a doctor at my penthouse within the hour. Full concierge service. Complete discretion. Have them bring IV fluids and whatever else they'll need for malnutrition treatment. Sir, I really think the emergency room... I think you'll do what I'm paying you to do. Dominic's voice didn't rise, didn't need to, unless you'd like to explain to your supervisor why you refused a patient transport. The medic swallowed hard, then nodded. Yes, sir, I'll make the arrangements. She disappeared back into the hotel, and Dominic slid into the car beside Belle, leaving careful distance between them, despite the intimacy of having just carried her through a crowded ballroom. He pulled off his tuxedo jacket and draped it over her shoulders. Belle hadn't realized she was shivering. Home. Fast, but smooth. Dominic spoke to the driver, then turned his attention back to Belle. The car pulled away from the hotel with barely a whisper of engine noise. Belle found herself cocooned in leather seats and the lingering warmth of Dominic's jacket, still trying to process what had just happened. This wasn't real. This didn't happen to people like her. Wealthy strangers didn't swoop in and rescue struggling art students. That was fiction fantasy, the kind of story she might sketch out in her studio during late-night sessions when reality felt too heavy to bear. This is crazy. The words came out before she could stop them. I don't even know you. You don't know me. You can't just take me to your penthouse. That's not how any of this works. How does it work then? Dominic's tone was genuinely curious. You collapse from hunger at a gala, get fired by people who worked you to the point of collapse. And then what? Take yourself to an emergency room you can't afford, go home to an empty apartment and hope you don't pass out again. The accuracy of his scenario, the bleakness of what her night would actually have been, made Belle's throat tight. That's not your problem to solve. Maybe not. Dominic turned to look at her fully, and in the passing streetlights his face was all sharp angles and shadows. But it's mine to solve tonight. Tomorrow you can go back to your life, make your own choices. Tonight you're going to eat a proper meal, see a doctor, and sleep somewhere safe. That's not negotiable. Why? The question burst out with more force than Belle intended. Why do you care? You don't know anything about me. Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his gaze steady on hers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an intensity that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. Because when you were falling and I caught you, you looked up at me with these eyes that were trying so hard to be strong while your whole body was giving up. And something in me... He paused as if searching for words he wasn't used to needing. Something recognized that look. That fight. I don't know you, Lena Hartley, but I know what it's like to be running on empty and still trying to stand. And I know what it means when someone catches you before you hit the ground. The vulnerability in his words, unexpected and raw, made Belle's breath catch. This wasn't a wealthy man playing savior. This was something more complicated, more personal, something that scared her almost as much as it drew her in. I don't need saving. Good. Dominic's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm not particularly good at it anyway, but I'm excellent at providing resources. Think of this as practical assistance. Practical assistance from a stranger who commands rooms full of people with a single word and has doctors making house calls to his penthouse. Belle shook her head, exhaustion and surrealism blending into something almost like laughter. This is the weirdest night of my entire life. It's about to get weirder. This time, there was definitely humor in Dominic's voice. Wait until you meet Ray. He's going to lose his mind trying to figure out what to make for someone who hasn't eaten in 3 days. Fair warning, he's deeply personally offended by empty stomachs. Despite everything, the strangeness, the fear, the sheer impossibility of her situation, Belle felt a smile tug at her lips. Your Chef Ray came with the penthouse. I tried to fire him 3 times before I realized he's actually invaluable. Dominic settled back against the seat, somehow managing to look completely relaxed in a way Belle suspected was carefully cultivated. He's going to take one look at you and start muttering about young people and modern diets and the decline of civilization. I'm not usually this thin. Belle found herself defending, though she wasn't sure why. It's just been a hard semester, expensive, and the jobs don't pay enough, and the loans don't cover enough, and there are only so many hours in a day to make up the difference. Art school. Belle nodded. Painting primarily, some mixed media. I'm in my final year at Ashworth Academy. Dominic's eyebrows rose slightly. That's a serious program. Competitive. Yeah. Belle pulled his jacket more tightly around her shoulders, letting herself sink into the warmth. I got lucky with scholarships, but lucky doesn't cover rent in Manhattan, or art supplies, or any of the 1,000 other things that cost money. So I work catering gigs and cafe shifts and whatever else I can find, and I paint when there's time left over, which there never really is. What do you paint? The question was casual, conversational, but something about the way Dominic asked it with genuine interest rather than polite small talk made Belle actually think about her answer. Moments, she said slowly. In between moments. The space between what was and what's coming. Transition. Transformation. The way light looks when it's starting to change but hasn't fully shifted yet. She paused suddenly, self-conscious. That probably sounds pretentious. It sounds specific, Dominic corrected. Specific is good. Specific means you know what you're doing. I know what I'm trying to do, Belle amended. Actually doing it is harder. There's this gap between the vision in my head and what ends up on the canvas, and I spend most of my time trying to bridge that gap while also working 40 hours a week at jobs that have nothing to do with art and everything to do with not being homeless. The car turned onto a street Belle recognized. Central Park West, where buildings had names instead of numbers and doormen who earned more than she did. Her stomach twisted with a new kind of anxiety. This was so far outside her world it might as well be another planet. This is where you live. Home is where the property taxes are obscene, Dominic said dryly. Try not to be too impressed. It's just a place. But it wasn't just a place, and they both knew it. The car pulled into a private underground garage, security immediately moving to open doors. Dominic was out and around to Belle's side before she could unfasten her seatbelt. He held out a hand, and after a moment's hesitation she took it, letting him help her out of the car. Her legs were steadier now, but still weak, and Dominic kept a careful hand at her elbow as they moved toward a private elevator that required a key card to operate. The whole setup screamed security privacy, the kind of careful protection that came with either extreme wealth or extreme danger, or both. "You're sure about this?" Belle asked as the elevator doors closed, sealing them into a space that suddenly felt very intimate. "I'm literally a stranger who broke your champagne glasses. You could just drop me at a diner with $20 and call it charity." Dominic looked at her, really looked at her, and Belle felt the weight of his attention like a physical thing. "I'm not sure about much," he admitted. "But I'm sure that watching you try to stand while your body was shutting down, seeing you apologize for being hungry, that did something to me. Made me angry. Made me want to fix it. And I'm a man who's used to fixing things when they need fixing. I'm not a thing." "No." Dominic's voice was soft but absolute. "You're not. You're a person who needed help tonight, and I was there to provide it. That's all this has to be, if that's all you want. Food, medical attention, a safe place to sleep. And tomorrow you walk away. No strings, no obligations, no expectations." The elevator opened directly into a penthouse that was somehow both exactly what Belle expected and nothing like she'd imagined. Clean lines, expensive but not ostentatious. Art on the walls that she immediately recognized as museum quality. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Central Park, the city spreading below like a carpet of lights. "Madonna Santa," a voice echoed from somewhere deeper in the apartment, accent thick with emotion. "He brings home a girl who looks like a strong wind would blow her away." "Dominic, what have you done?" A man appeared in the foyer. Late 50s, stocky build, magnificent salt and pepper hair, wearing an apron dusted with flour. His eyes landed on Belle, and his expression transformed from irritation to instant concern. "Dio mio, she's half-starved. Dominic, explain yourself. Who is this angel, and why does she look like she hasn't had a proper meal in months?" "Ray, this is Belle." Dominic's tone suggested this was a familiar routine. "Belle, this is Ray, who you'll notice has no concept of personal boundaries or appropriate questions." "Appropriate questions?" Ray huffed. "I'll tell you what's appropriate. Food. Immediately. Sit, bellissima. You sit right here and Ray will fix everything." He was already guiding Belle toward a kitchen larger than her entire apartment, settling her onto a stool at a massive island, muttering under his breath about modern youth and starvation diets and the general tragedy of empty stomachs. Despite her exhaustion, despite the surreal quality of her entire evening, Belle found herself smiling. He's very passionate about food. Ray is passionate about not letting beautiful young women faint from hunger. The older man corrected, already assembling ingredients with practiced efficiency. "You, Dominic, should be ashamed. Where did you find her? How long has she been like this?" "Never mind. Don't answer." Ray can see everything he needs to see. He began cooking with focused intensity, usually reserved for surgery, and the kitchen filled with the scent of garlic and herbs and something rich and savory that made Belle's stomach clench with sudden desperate hunger. "Start with broth," Dominic instructed. "Her system can't handle heavy food right away. You think Ray doesn't know this?" But the chef was already ladling something into a bowl, setting it in front of Belle with unexpected gentleness. "Drink slowly, Cara. Small sips. We'll work up to the real food." The broth was perfect. Rich, flavorful, warming. Belle forced herself to follow instructions, taking small sips, even though every cell in her body wanted to gulp it down. Ray watched with approval, nodding to himself as color slowly began to return to her cheeks. The doorbell chimed softly. Dominic moved to answer it, returning moments later with a woman carrying a medical bag. She was younger than Belle expected, professional and kind-eyed. "Dr. Patterson." She introduced herself, setting down her bag. "Mr. Steele called about a patient needing assessment and treatment. For the next 30 minutes, doctor." Patterson conducted a thorough examination while Ray continued cooking, and Dominic watched from nearby, his expression unreadable. The doctor confirmed what they all already knew. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, dangerous levels of stress and exhaustion. "I'd like to start an IV," Dr. Patterson said. "Get some fluids in you properly. You're not at critical levels, but you're close enough that I'd rather be cautious." Belle wanted to protest, but she was too tired, and the broth had settled warmly in her stomach, making her realize just how close she'd come to a complete physical breakdown. So she nodded, let the doctor set up the IV in her arm, felt the cool flow of fluids beginning to rehydrate her starved system. Ray presented a plate of delicate pasta, perfectly portioned for someone whose stomach had been empty too long. Belle ate slowly, savoring each bite, trying not to think about the cost of all this care. The debt she was accumulating with every moment in Dominic's penthouse. "Stop calculating," Dominic said quietly, somehow reading her thoughts. "There is no bill. There is no debt. Tonight is exactly what I said it was. Practical assistance. Nobody does this without wanting something." Belle's voice was too exhausted to be anything but honest. "Most people don't." Dominic's dark eyes held hers. "I'm not most people. That's what I'm afraid of." Dominic smiled, really smiled this time, and it transformed his entire face. "Good instincts. But not good enough to stop you from being here, which means some part of you trusts me, or at least trusts that whatever I am, I'm not an immediate threat. That's a pretty low bar for trust. It's a start." Dominic straightened. "Finish eating. Dr. Patterson will monitor you for another hour while the IV finishes. Then you're going to sleep. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next. I have class tomorrow." "You have rest tomorrow," Dominic corrected. "Class can wait 24 hours. Your body can't." He was right, and Belle knew it. But the anxiety of falling behind, of losing even a day, made her chest tight. "I can't afford stop." Dominic's voice was gentle but firm. "For tonight, just stop. Stop calculating. Stop worrying about cost. Stop trying to figure out what the catch is. Just eat, rest, and let yourself be taken care of. One night. That's all I'm asking." Belle looked at him, the stranger who had caught her before she fell, who had brought her to his home, who was offering care without expectation. And she made a decision that was probably stupid but felt in that moment necessary. "Okay." The word came out as a whisper. One night. Something that might have been relief flickered across Dominic's expression. "One night," he agreed. And as Ray continued to fuss and doctor, Patterson monitored her vitals and the city glittered outside floor-to-ceiling windows, Belle Hartley let herself be caught, be held, be helped. She tried not to think too hard about what it meant that the first person to truly see her falling was a man whose dark eyes held secrets she didn't know how to read. Belle woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize, wrapped in sheets that felt like clouds against her skin. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't place where she was. The ceiling was too high, the bed too soft, the silence too complete. Then memory flooded back in fragments. The gala. The fall. Dominic's arms catching her. The warmth of his penthouse and Ray's insistent feeding. She sat up slowly, testing her body's responses. The fourth was gone, her arm bandaged neatly where the needle had been. Someone had left her clothes folded on a chair, not her catering uniform, but soft cotton pajamas that were clearly expensive and several sizes too large. A note rested on top in bold, masculine handwriting. "Your uniform is being cleaned. These will do until Ray finishes breakfast. Don't even think about leaving without eating. D." The presumption should have annoyed her. Instead, Belle found herself smiling as she pulled on the oversized pajamas and padded barefoot out of the bedroom. The penthouse looked different in daylight, less intimidating, more lived in. Books stacked on end tables, a laptop left open on the dining table, art that clearly meant something personal rather than just expensive decoration. She followed the sound of voices and the scent of coffee to the kitchen, where Ray was already in full operation mode, and Dominic sat at the island reading something on his phone, dressed casually in dark jeans and a Henley that somehow made him look more dangerous than the tuxedo had. "She lives," Ray announced dramatically, And look, Dominic, she has color in her face like a human person instead of a ghost. Morning. Dominic's dark eyes assessed her with the same careful attention he'd shown the night before. How do you feel? Like I slept for 1,000 years? Belle admitted, sliding onto a stool. What time is it? Almost 11. Dominic poured her coffee without asking, prepared it with cream and sugar as if he somehow knew how she took it. Dr. Patterson came back this morning to check on you. You were sleeping so deeply she didn't want to wake you, but she said everything looks better. Your hydration levels are improving. Belle accepted the coffee, trying not to think about how Dominic had apparently watched her sleep long enough to notice she was deeply unconscious. She came back. You're paying her to make house calls twice. I'm paying her to make sure you're recovering properly, Dominic corrected. Money I have, medical training I don't. Therefore I employ people who do. The logic of the wealthy. The logic of someone who doesn't take chances with people's health. Dominic's tone was mild, but there was steel underneath. Eat what Ray makes you, all of it. Your body needs to remember what proper nutrition feels like. Ray was already setting down a plate, scrambled eggs with herbs, perfectly toasted bread, fresh fruit arranged artfully. Belle's stomach growled audibly and both men smiled. Your stomach at least has good sense, Ray said with satisfaction, even if the rest of you doesn't know how to take care of itself properly. I know how, Belle said quietly, picking up her fork. I just haven't had the resources to do it right. The words hung in the air, honest and stark. Dominic's expression shifted into something harder to read. He watched her take her first bite, waited until she'd eaten several more before speaking again. Tell me about your art. The subject change was deliberate, giving her space to eat without the weight of her circumstances pressing down. Belle found herself grateful for it, even as she tried to figure out how to explain what she created to someone who lived in a world of museum-quality pieces. I work mostly in oils, she began, but I've been experimenting with mixed media lately, incorporating found objects, newspaper, sometimes fabric. I'm interested in layers both literal and metaphorical, the way things build on each other, the way history seeps through even when you try to cover it. Like palimpsests, Dominic said, surprising her with the reference. Exactly like palimpsests. Belle set down her fork, animated now despite her exhaustion. You can paint over something, but traces always remain. Light shows through. Texture reveals itself. I try to make that visible, intentional. The past informing the present, even when we pretend it doesn't. Do you have a portfolio, digital or physical? Both. My phone's in my bag, wherever that ended up. Hall closet, Dominic replied. I'll get it. He disappeared and Ray immediately leaned in conspiratorially. He's interested, you know. Dominic doesn't ask about art unless he's genuinely interested. Usually he just nods politely and writes a check. Interested in the art or interested in me? Ray's mustache twitched with amusement. Is there a difference, Kara? You are your art. Your art is you. This is what makes it valuable. Dominic returned with her battered canvas bag, setting it gently on the counter. Belle pulled out her phone-cracked screen, 2 generations old but functional, and navigated to her digital portfolio while trying not to feel self-conscious about showing her work to someone who clearly had the resources to own anything he wanted. She handed the phone to Dominic and watched his face as he scrolled through images of her paintings. His expression gave nothing away, but he took his time studying each piece carefully before moving to the next. The silence stretched, and Belle forced herself to keep eating even though her stomach had knotted with anxiety. These are remarkable. Dominic looked up at her with something like surprise in his dark eyes. You're not just talented, you're genuinely skilled. There's technical mastery here alongside the vision. Thank you. Belle managed, not trusting herself to say more. Where are these now? In your studio storage. Some in my apartment. It doubles as my studio, all 800 square feet of it. Some in the school's senior exhibition space. A few I sold to help cover rent, but those were earlier pieces, not my best work. Dominic continued scrolling, stopped on an image of a canvas Belle had titled Between Shadows. It showed a figure suspended in space, surrounded by fragments of previous selves, ghostly layers that both constrained and supported the central form. This one. His voice was quiet, almost reverent. Is it available? It's in the senior show at Ashworth. On display but not for sale yet. The exhibition opens in 3 weeks. I want it. Dominic's tone was decisive, final. And I want to see the rest of your work. The physical pieces, not just photographs. Belle stared at him. You want to come to my apartment? My incredibly tiny, barely heated 4th-floor walk-up apartment in Washington Heights. I want to see your work in the space where you create it, Dominic corrected. Context matters. You know that. You just explained how history and environment inform everything you make. That's different. That's conceptual. This is just poverty. The word came out harsher than Belle intended, but she was too tired to soften it. No. Dominic's voice was quiet but absolute. This is where you make art despite poverty. There's a significant difference. One is circumstance. The other is choice and persistence and the kind of determination that interests me very much. Ray, who had been quietly listening while preparing more food, made a small sound of approval. He's right, Bella. Where you come from matters less than what you make of it. Easy to say when you're standing in a Central Park West penthouse. You think I started here? Dominic's laugh held no humor. You think I was born with marble countertops and private doctors? I grew up in Red Hook, Brooklyn in a 2-bedroom apartment with 7 people and roaches that paid more rent than we could afford. I know exactly what poverty looks like, Belle. I know what it feels like to be hungry, to be invisible, to work yourself to exhaustion and still come up short. The rawness in his words, the sudden glimpse of something beneath the controlled exterior, made Belle look at him more carefully. She'd assumed wealth, assumed privilege, assumed the kind of background that came with penthouses and private doctors. But there was truth in Dominic's voice, history in his eyes that spoke of distances traveled. How did you get from there to here? That's a long story. Dominic's expression shifted, closing off slightly. And one that's not particularly relevant right now. The point is, I'm not judging your circumstances. I'm interested in your work despite them. Or maybe because of them. Art that comes from struggle tends to have more truth in it. Not always. Belle argued, falling back into familiar academic territory. Some of the greatest art came from artists who had nothing but time and resources. Comfort can produce brilliance too, but not your kind of brilliance. Dominic held up her phone, the image of Between Shadows still displayed. This doesn't come from comfort. This comes from knowing what it's like to be caught between who you were and who you're becoming. From understanding suspension transformation, the weight of history you're trying to shed while still being shaped by it. The accuracy of his reading, the way he'd seen straight through to the core of what she'd been trying to express, made Belle's chest tight. You know about art. I know about people, Dominic corrected. Art just makes people visible in ways they can't hide. And yours makes you very visible, Belle Hartley. The way he said her name, full name this time with careful attention to each syllable, sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. There was intensity in Dominic's attention that was both thrilling and terrifying, the sense that once he focused on something he didn't look away until he understood it completely. I should go home, Belle said, suddenly needing distance from the weight of his regard. I've imposed enough. You've been incredibly kind, but I have responsibilities, and I can't just— Your responsibilities will still be there this afternoon, Dominic interrupted. But first, there's something else we need to address. He pulled out his phone, tapped something, then turned it toward her. On the screen was a bank transfer confirmation to Belle Hartley for $50,000. Belle's vision actually grayed at the edges. What is that? What did you do? I bought Between Shadows, Dominic said calmly. That's the purchase price. That painting isn't worth $50,000. Belle's voice came out too loud, edged with panic. It's a student work. I've never sold anything for more than a few hundred. You can't just— I can, and I did. Dominic's tone was maddeningly reasonable. That painting is worth whatever someone is willing to pay for it. I'm willing to pay $50,000. Therefore, that's its value. This is charity. Belle's voice shook. This is you feeling sorry for the starving art student and trying to throw money at the problem. I don't want charity, Dominic. I don't need— It's not charity if I'm getting something I want in exchange. Dominic leaned forward, his intensity suddenly sharp and focused. "I want that painting, Belle. I wanted it the moment I saw it on your phone. The price reflects its worth to me, not some arbitrary market value decided by galleries and critics who wouldn't recognize real talent if it fell on them. $50,000 could change my life." "Yes," Dominic agreed simply. "So let it." "Why?" The question burst out of her raw and desperate. "Why are you doing this?" "You caught me when I fell." "Fine. You made sure I was fed and had medical care." "Okay. But this is something else entirely. This is life-changing money, and I don't understand what you want from me in return." Dominic was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and absolutely sincere. "I caught you when you fell because some instinct in me wouldn't let you hit the ground. I brought you here because I wanted to make sure you were safe. And I'm buying your art because it deserves to be bought, because you deserve to be valued, and because watching you try to argue your way out of being helped is making me understand just how long you've been doing this alone. I'm fine alone." "No, you're not. You're surviving alone." Dominic's jaw tightened. "There's a difference. And before you tell me again that you don't need saving, I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to give you room to breathe, space to create without constantly calculating whether you can afford to eat. That's not rescue. That's just removing obstacles by throwing money at them." "I have money to throw." Dominic shrugged. "And you have talent that's being suffocated by poverty. This seems like a reasonable exchange to me." Ray sat down a fresh cup of coffee in front of Belle. "The boy makes sense even if he's terrible at explaining himself. Accept the money, Kara. Make your art. Let someone appreciate what you create. This is not charity. This is patronage. Very old tradition. Very respectable." "Patronage comes with expectations," Belle countered. "Obligations. Only if you let it." Dominic came around the island until he was close enough that Belle had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I'm going to say this once as clearly as I can. I want nothing from you except the painting I've already purchased. No obligations, no strings, no expectations of anything beyond what you choose to give freely. You can take the money, go back to your life, and never speak to me again. That's completely within your rights." "But," Belle prompted, because there was clearly more. Dominic's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "But I'm also going to offer you my card and tell you that if you need anything at all, you can call me. Not because you owe me, not because I expect something in return, but because sometimes it's easier to survive when you know someone's in your corner." He pulled out a business card, set it on the counter between them. Heavy card stock, minimal design, just a name and number. Dominic Steele. No company, no title, nothing to indicate what he actually did for a living. "What do you do?" Belle asked, touching the card but not picking it up. "For work, I mean." "How did you get from Red Hook to Central Park West?" "Various business interests," Dominic said after a slight pause. "Investments. The kind of work that's easier to show than explain." It was a non-answer, and they both knew it. But there was a warning in Dominic's tone, a boundary being drawn, and Belle found herself respecting it even as curiosity gnawed at her. "Various business interests," she repeated. "That covers a lot of territory." "It does." Dominic's expression gave nothing away. "Let's just say I'm good at moving things from one place to another and making sure the right people get what they need." The phrasing was careful, almost deliberately vague, and Belle felt the first real prickle of unease since waking up. She'd been so focused on Dominic's unexpected kindness, his generosity, his interest in her art, that she hadn't stopped to question what kind of man had the resources to command private doctors and buy paintings for $50,000 on impulse. "You're scared now." Dominic observed his voice softening. "Good. You should have been scared last night, honestly. Coming home with a stranger, no matter how good his intentions seemed." "Are you trying to frighten me?" "I'm trying to be honest with you." Dominic stepped back, giving her space. "My life is complicated, Belle. The way I make money isn't always conventional. But I've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it, and I've never lied about who I am to anyone who asked directly. So if I ask directly who you are, you'll tell me. I'll tell you that I'm a man who grew up with nothing and built something substantial through a combination of intelligence, ruthlessness when necessary, and knowing when to help people who needed helping. Dominic's dark eyes held hers steadily. I'll tell you that I've done things I'm not proud of and things I'd do again without hesitation. I'll tell you that people fear me for good reason, respect me for better ones, and that very few people see me the way you saw me last night, as someone who could be kind without calculation. But you were calculating. Belle said slowly, pieces falling into place. You saw an opportunity. A transaction. No. Dominic's voice went hard. I saw someone falling and caught them. Everything after that was instinct, not strategy. If I'd been calculating, I would have let you fall, made sure you were handed off to medical professionals, and written a check to the catering company to cover any liability. What I did instead was bring you to my home feed. You stay up half the night making sure you were stable, and buy your art this morning because I wanted to give you options I knew you didn't have. The rawness in his words, the frustration bleeding through his controlled exterior, made Belle pause. Whatever Dominic Steele was, businessman, criminal, something in between, he'd been genuine in his concern for her. Of that she was certain. I'm still scared. Good, Dominic said again. Fear means you're paying attention. But Belle, I need you to hear this. Whatever I am, whatever I've done, whatever business interests I have that might exist in moral gray areas, I would never hurt you. That's not a line I cross. Women, children, innocent people just trying to survive, they're off limits. Always have been, always will be. That's supposed to be reassuring. It's supposed to be honest. Dominic picked up her phone from the counter, handed it back to her. The money's in your account. It'll clear by this afternoon. Use it however you want. Pay your rent, your loans, stock up on art supplies, whatever you need. The painting will stay in the senior show until the exhibition ends, then I'll arrange to have it delivered here. And if you never want to see me again after you walk out that door, I'll respect that completely. Belle stood, raised delicious breakfast settling warm in her stomach. $50,000 suddenly real in her bank account, and a dangerous man offering her freedom from the grinding poverty that had been slowly crushing her for 3 years. It should have been an easy decision. Take the money and run. Disappear back into her own life. Forget that Dominic Steele existed. But she couldn't stop seeing the way he'd looked at her when she was falling, the care in his hands when he'd carried her to the car, the absolute conviction in his voice when he told her she deserved to be valued. She couldn't forget that in a room full of wealthy people who had looked straight through her, Dominic had been the only one to actually see her. I want to show you my studio, Belle heard herself say. The rest of my work. But on my terms, in my space. If you're really interested in my art and not just trying to rescue me, then you can see where it comes from. Something flickered in Dominic's expression. Surprise, pleasure, satisfaction. Maybe all three. When this afternoon, give me time to go home, clean up, make sure the place doesn't look like a complete disaster. Belle pulled her phone closer, protective. And Dominic, if I'm letting you into my space, into my work, then I need you to be straight with me. No more vague answers about various business interests. If there's danger in knowing you, if there's risk in taking your money, I need to understand what I'm walking into. Dominic studied her for a long moment, and Belle could see him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding how much truth she could handle. My father ran the Brooklyn docks for 20 years, he said finally. When he died, I inherited his network, his connections, and his reputation. I've built on that foundation, expanded it, made it legitimate where I could, kept it functional where I couldn't. I work with people who operate outside traditional systems because sometimes traditional systems don't serve the people who need them most. I move money, goods, information, and sometimes people from places they're trapped to places they can breathe. Is all of it legal? No. Is any of it unconscionable? Not by my definition. Your definition being what? That anyone I help is someone who couldn't get help through legal channels. That anyone I move against is someone who's caused real harm. That the money I make goes toward building something better than what I inherited. Dominic's jaw tightened. I'm not a saint, Belle. But I'm not a monster either. I'm just someone who learned early that the system doesn't work for people like us. So I built something outside it that does." The honesty was stark uncomfortable, and probably more than Belle had any right to ask for. But it gave her something to hold on to. Not reassurance exactly, but clarity. Dominic Steele was dangerous, but in specific ways to specific people, and she apparently wasn't one of them. "Okay," Belle said quietly. "My address is 342 West 187th Street, apartment 4B. Come by around 3. Just me." Belle met his eyes. "Just you. Not with security, not with assistance. Just you. Just me." Dominic agreed. Ray, who had been listening to the entire exchange with unabashed interest, clapped his hands together. "Finally some honesty. This is progress. And Bella, you eat more before you go. Take food with you," Ray insists. He was already packing containers with leftovers enough to feed Belle for days, and she didn't have the energy to protest. Dominic walked her to the elevator when she was ready to leave, her own clothes cleaned, and returned her bag packed with food and her phone heavy with impossible money. 3:00, Dominic confirmed as the elevator doors began to close. "Your space, your terms. I'll see where the art comes from," Belle said. "And I'll decide if I trust you." Dominic's smile was sharp and honest. "Fair enough." The elevator descended, and Belle watched the numbers count down, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 18 hours. She'd collapsed at a gala, been caught by a dangerous man, slept in a Central Park penthouse, and woken up with $50,000 she hadn't earned. None of it made sense. All of it felt both too good to be true and somehow exactly right. Her phone buzzed as she stepped out into the lobby. A text from an unknown number that had to be Dominic. "Ray sends his love and says, if you don't eat everything he packed, he'll take it personally. Also, for what it's worth, I'm glad I caught you." Belle found herself smiling despite the confusion, despite the fear, despite every reasonable instinct that said she should run far and fast from Dominic Steele and his complicated life. Instead, she texted back, "See you at 3, and stepped out into the cold January morning, $50,000 richer, fed for the first time in days, and walking toward an afternoon that would either confirm her instincts or prove that sometimes the person who catches you when you're falling might just be worth the risk of trusting. The subway ride back to Washington Heights gave Belle time to think, though thinking only made everything more complicated. She sat with Ray's food containers balanced on her lap, her phone heavy in her pocket with its impossible bank balance, and tried to make sense of a world that had shifted on its axis in less than 24 hours. $50,000. The number kept circling through her mind like a prayer or a curse, she couldn't decide which. It was more money than her parents made in a year combined, more than her entire student loan debt for her final semester, more than she'd earned in the last 3 years of catering gigs and cafe shifts and every other desperate attempt to stay afloat in a city designed to drown people without resources. And Dominic had transferred it like it meant nothing, like buying a painting from a starving student for an astronomical price was just another morning transaction. Belle's hands tightened on the food containers. She should be grateful. She was grateful. But gratitude came tangled with fear and confusion and an attraction she didn't want to acknowledge. Because Dominic Steele was beautiful in the way dangerous things were beautiful. All controlled power and sharp edges, and the promise of something that could either save you or destroy you depending on how you approached it. The train lurched into her stop, and Belle climbed the stairs to street level, emerging into the familiar chaos of Washington Heights. Her neighborhood was a world away from Central Park West. Bodegas instead of boutiques, fire escapes instead of doormen, the constant symphony of multiple languages blending together. This was where real New York lived, where immigrants and artists and everyone else the city hadn't managed to squeeze out yet made their stand. Her building was a pre-war walk-up that had seen better days around the time the Brooklyn Bridge opened. Belle climbed the 4 flights with practiced efficiency, juggling food containers in her bag, stepping over the loose board on the 3rd-floor landing that the landlord kept promising to fix. Her apartment door stuck in its frame, like always requiring a specific combination of key turn and shoulder push that she'd perfected over 2 years of living there. Inside the space was exactly as she'd left it, tiny, cluttered, and unmistakably hers. 800 square feet divided between a main room that served as both studio and living area, a kitchen barely large enough to turn around in, and a bathroom where the shower only worked if you jiggled the handle just right. Canvases leaned against every available wall surface. Some finished, some in progress, some abandoned halfway through when she'd run out of either inspiration or supplies. The winter light coming through the single large window was perfect for painting one of the few genuine advantages of the apartment. Belle had arranged her easel to catch the northern exposure, and her palette table sat within arm's reach, still covered with dried paint from her last session 3 days ago. Had it really only been 3 days? It felt like a lifetime. She put Ray's food in her ancient refrigerator, which suddenly looked very empty despite the containers, and then stood in the middle of her studio, seeing it through fresh eyes. Through Dominic's eyes. What would he see when he walked in here? The cramped quarters, the second-hand furniture, the gap in the floorboards where cold air whistled through. Or would he see what she saw, a space filled with work and passion, and the stubborn refusal to give up on something as impractical as art? Belle spent the next 2 hours cleaning with manic focus. She organized canvases, wiped down surfaces, swept the floor, tried to make her apartment look less like the home of someone barely surviving and more like the studio of a serious artist. The distinction was subtle but important. She wasn't trying to hide her circumstances. Dominic already knew about those. She was trying to present her work in its best light to show him that poverty didn't mean lack of professionalism or dedication. At 2:45, she changed out of her cleaning clothes into jeans and a paint-stained sweater she'd owned since freshman year. She pulled her hair back, washed the cleaning grime off her hands, and then stood in front of her largest completed canvas trying to center herself. The painting was titled Night Witness, and it showed a cityscape being simultaneously demolished and rebuilt, destruction and creation happening in the same moment, layers of past and present and future, all visible at once. It was one of her strongest pieces, technically accomplished and emotionally raw, and she'd been saving it for her final thesis presentation. A knock sounded at her door at exactly 3 o'clock. Belle took a breath, steadied herself, and opened it. Dominic stood in her dim hallway looking impossibly out of place in his expensive clothes and controlled presence, but his expression when he met her eyes was open, curious, genuinely interested. He'd come alone as she'd requested. No security hovering in the background, no assistants carrying briefcases. Just him holding a bag from a high-end art supply store that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. "I wasn't sure what you might need," he said by way of greeting, "so I asked them to put together a comprehensive selection. If it's presumptuous, I apologize." Belle took the bag, looked inside, and felt her breath catch. Oil paints in colors she'd been rationing for months. Brushes she'd only seen in catalogs. Canvas stretchers and gesso and medium that would last her through graduation and beyond. It was thoughtful and practical and exactly what an artist would need, chosen by someone who had actually paid attention to what kind of work she did. "It's perfect," she managed. "Thank you. Can I come in?" Belle stepped back, led him into her tiny apartment, and watched his face as he took in her studio. Dominic moved slowly through the space, his attention complete and focused, studying each canvas with the same careful attention he'd given her digital portfolio that morning. He didn't speak, didn't offer immediate commentary, just looked at her work with an intensity that made Belle's skin feel too tight. "You can tell me what you think," she said when the silence stretched too long. "I'm used to critique. Art school is basically 3 years of having your work torn apart." "I'm not critiquing," Dominic said quietly, standing in front of Night Witness. "I'm trying to understand how someone your age has this much depth, this much understanding of complexity and contradiction." "You mean, how does someone poor understand struggle?" Belle couldn't keep the edge from her voice. "No." Dominic turned to face her, his expression serious. "I mean, how does someone who's 24 years old understand that destruction and creation are the same process, that you can't build something new without demolishing what came before? That transformation requires both violence and care?" He gestured to the canvas. "This isn't just technically skilled, Belle. It's emotionally sophisticated in a way that usually takes decades to develop." The accuracy of his reading, the way he'd articulated something she'd felt but never quite put into words, made Belle's chest tight. "I've had to rebuild myself a few times," she said quietly. "You learn things when you keep having to start over." "Yes," Dominic agreed. "You do." He moved to the next canvas, a smaller piece she'd titled, "Between Words." It showed two figures in conversation, but the space between them was filled with all the things left unsaid, ghostly text that suggested meaning without ever becoming clear language that existed in the gap between intention and expression. "This is what it's like talking to you," Dominic said, and there was humor in his voice. "Everything you're not saying is as loud as what you are. Same could be said about you." "Fair." Dominic's smile was sharp and honest. "What do you want to know?" Belle sat on her second-hand couch, suddenly exhausted. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know. This morning you told me about your father, about the docks, about building something outside traditional systems. But that doesn't tell me who you are now, what you actually do, why people fear you." Dominic was quiet for a moment, then came to sit beside her. Not too close, leaving space between them, but near enough that she could feel the heat of him in her cold apartment. "My father ran a union," he began. "Longshoremen, dock workers, the people who moved cargo in and out of Brooklyn. It was legitimate on paper, but the reality was more complicated. He provided protection, settled disputes, made sure his people got paid fairly, and worked safely. Sometimes that meant negotiating with shipping companies. Sometimes it meant negotiating with people who operated in shadows. The mob." Belle said it flatly. "That word covers a lot of territory and doesn't really explain much," Dominic replied. "But yes, my father had connections to organized families. He worked with them when it benefited his people, stood against them when it didn't. He built a reputation as someone who couldn't be bought but could be reasoned with, someone who kept his word and expected others to keep theirs. And when he died, I was 22, 3 years older than you are now." Dominic's jaw tightened. "The families thought they could absorb his network, fold his people into their operations. They were wrong. I held the line, kept the independence he'd built, and expanded into territory they didn't expect. I started moving money for people who needed it, moved quietly, helping people immigrate when legal channels failed them, providing security for businesses in neighborhoods where police presence was either absent or actively harmful." "You became what your father was," Belle said slowly. "But bigger. I became what my father would have been if he'd had more ambition and less sentiment." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact. "I loved what he built, but I'm not bound by his limitations. I saw opportunities where he saw complications, and I was willing to take risks he wouldn't have considered. Like what Dominic looked at her, assessing how much truth she could handle. Like moving into finance, helping people who've been denied traditional banking services, setting up networks that let money flow where it needs to go without government oversight or institutional gatekeeping. It's legal in the sense that I'm not breaking any laws I can't defend in court. It's illegal in the sense that I'm deliberately circumventing systems designed to keep certain people poor and powerless. Robin Hood with better lawyers. Robin Hood with an understanding that sometimes the system itself is the problem, not individual actors within it." Dominic's expression was serious. "I help people, Belle. That's what I do. But I also make a significant profit doing it. And I'm not apologetic about that. The difference between me and the people I work against is that I remember where I came from. I remember what it's like to be powerless, and I use my power to give other people options they wouldn't have otherwise. Including me. Including you." Dominic held her gaze. "You were invisible at that gala. Not to me, but to everyone else. They looked straight through you like you didn't exist. That's what poverty does in places like Manhattan. It renders you functionally invisible to people with resources, and I thought, here's someone with genuine talent working herself to exhaustion, being ignored by everyone who could actually help her. So I helped. By throwing money at me. By recognizing value and compensating it appropriately." Dominic's voice firmed. "Don't diminish what you've accomplished by calling my purchase charity. Your work is worth what I paid. More probably if you had proper representation and gallery connections. I just eliminated the middleman and gave you the resources directly." Belle stood restless, moving to her palette table and running her fingers over dried paint. "It scares me," she admitted quietly. "How much I want to trust you. How easy it would be to let you solve problems I've been grinding myself down trying to handle alone. That kind of dependence, that kind of debt, it's dangerous." "Yes," Dominic agreed. "It is, which is why I'm not asking you to depend on me. I'm offering you resources with no strings attached. Use the money however you want. Keep creating. Build the career you're working toward. And if you never want to see me again after today, that's your choice. But you want to see me again?" Belle said it as a statement, not a question. "Yes." Dominic's honesty was stark, undefended. "I want to see you again. I want to watch you work. I want to understand how you think, how you translate what you see into these layers of meaning. I want to know you, Belle. Not as a project or an investment or someone I'm helping, as a person who interests me in ways I don't entirely understand." The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with possibility and danger in equal measure. Belle's heart was racing, her artist's eye cataloging the way light fell across Dominic's face, the tension in his shoulders, the careful control he maintained even while admitting to wanting something. "I don't do relationships," she said, needing to establish boundaries before she lost the ability to think clearly. "I don't have time. I don't have emotional space. And I definitely don't have experience with men who carry the kind of complications you do. I'm not asking for a relationship." Dominic stood slowly, crossed to where she stood by her palette table, but stopped just outside her personal space. "I'm asking for permission to be in your orbit, to see you sometimes, to take you to dinner when you have time, to maybe, if you're willing, understand what happens between the moment you conceive a painting and the moment it's finished. You want to watch me work, I want to understand your process." Dominic's dark eyes held hers. "I want to see transformation happening in real time. And yes, selfishly, I want to spend time with someone who sees the world the way you do, who can articulate complexity without drowning in it, who survived falling by learning how to paint the descent." The poetry in his words, unexpected and genuine, made something in Belle's chest crack open. This was dangerous. This was exactly the kind of attraction that could derail everything she'd worked for, distract her from her goals, complicate her life in ways she couldn't afford. She should say no, should thank him for the money and the art supplies and his interest, but draw a firm line between business and personal. Instead, she heard herself say what came next, and everything after that moment would be measured as before, and after these words left her mouth. "I'm working on a new series." Belle's words came out steadier than she felt. 5 canvases, all interconnected, exploring the concept of witness. Being seen versus being observed. The difference between visibility and exposure. "I usually work alone, but if you're serious about wanting to understand the process, you could come by sometimes while I'm painting. No expectations, no pressure, just presence." Something fierce and pleased moved through Dominic's carefully controlled features. "I would like that very much." "There are rules," Belle continued, needing to maintain some sense of control. "When I'm working, I don't stop for conversation. You can watch, but you don't interrupt. If I ask you to leave, you leave immediately. No questions. And you can't." She paused, searching for words. "You can't try to influence the work. I need to know it's mine, that my vision isn't being shaped by your presence or your money or your expectations. Understood?" Dominic pulled out his phone, handed it to her. "Put in your number. I'll text before I come by, make sure it's a good time. And Belle, I promise you I have no interest in influencing your work. What you create is yours. I just want to witness it happening." Belle took his phone, entered her contact information, handed it back. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and the simple touch sent electricity up her arm. She pulled back quickly, but not before she saw recognition flicker in Dominic's eyes. He'd felt it too. "I should go." His voice was quiet, careful. "Let you settle in. Process everything that's happened today." He moved toward the door, then paused, reaching into his jacket pocket. "There's a private gallery showing Thursday night, contemporary artist whose work I think you'd appreciate. If you're interested, I'd like to take you. 8 o'clock. Belle's heart kicked against her ribs. Like a date, like an opportunity to see art you might not otherwise access. Dominic's smile was slight but genuine. If it becomes a date in the process, I wouldn't object. But there's no pressure for it to be anything more than two people looking at paintings. I'm very opinionated about technique. I'm counting on it. After he left, Belle stood in her studio surrounded by $50,000 worth of impossible possibility and tried to understand what she'd just agreed to. Not just the gallery, not just letting him watch her work, but something larger, more dangerous, more necessary than she'd been willing to admit before today. Her phone buzzed. Dominic Ray wants to know if you ate the food. Also Thursday at 8 p.m. I'll send a car at 7:30. No arguments about the car. It's February and you live in Washington Heights. Belle smiled despite herself, typed back, "Tell Ray I'm eating it now." And fine, yes to the car. But I'm wearing paint-stained jeans and combat boots. This is who I am. The response came quickly. Good. I don't want you any other way. The next 2 days passed in a blur of productivity that felt almost surreal. Belle worked on her thesis series with a focus she hadn't experienced in months. The constant anxiety about money finally quiet enough that she could actually hear her own artistic vision. She painted until her back ached and her hands cramped, building layer upon layer, making visible the invisible. Wednesday afternoon, her phone rang. Ethan Holloway's name on the screen. Belle Hartley. His voice was warm, familiar. Dominic gave me your number. I hope that's all right. I wanted to follow up on my invitation. Would you be interested in coming by my studio next week? I'd love to see your thesis work in person. Belle's breath caught. Ethan Holloway. Calling her, wanting to see her work. Yes. Absolutely. When they made arrangements for the following Tuesday and Belle hung up feeling like reality had shifted sideways. 3 days ago she'd been collapsing from hunger at a catering gig. Now she had money in her account supplies in her studio, and one of the most respected contemporary artists in New York wanting to see her paintings. Thursday arrived wrapped in February cold, the kind that cut through layers and settled in bones. Belle stood in front of her bathroom mirror studying her reflection with critical eyes. She'd kept her promise about the paint-stained jeans and combat boots, but paired them with a vintage silk blouse she'd found at a thrift store years ago, deep burgundy that brought out the warmth in her hazel eyes. Her dark hair was loose around her shoulders and she'd applied minimal makeup because anything more felt like pretending to be someone she wasn't. The effect was somewhere between art student and young professional, which felt right. She wasn't trying to fit into Dominic's world. She was letting him see hers. Her phone buzzed at 7:25. Dominic Carr is downstairs. Driver's name is Marcus. Take your time. Belle grabbed her worn leather jacket and headed down the 4 flights with her heart hammering. The black car waiting at the curb was the same one from the night she'd collapsed, and Dominic stood beside it dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that somehow made him look both sophisticated and dangerous. His eyes tracked over her outfit with appreciation. You look perfect. I look like myself. Exactly. Dominic slid in beside her, maintaining that careful distance that suggested restraint rather than disinterest. The artist tonight is Ethan Holloway. Have you heard of him? Belle's head whipped around. Ethan Holloway. The Ethan Holloway who did the Fractured Light series. That's the one. Dominic's mouth curved with satisfaction at her reaction. He does private showings sometimes for collectors who appreciate his work. I thought you might want to see his new pieces before critics get their hands on them. Want to see them. Belle's voice came out higher than intended. Dominic Ethan Holloway is one of the most important contemporary artists working today. Good. Then I made the right choice. The gallery was in Tribeca, housed in a converted warehouse with the kind of understated exterior that screamed exclusive. Dominic entered a code and they stepped into a space that took Belle's breath away. Industrial architecture softened by perfect lighting, concrete floors warmed by carefully placed rugs, and the art itself, massive paintings, each one at least 8 feet tall, showing urban landscapes fractured and reformed in ways that suggested both destruction and hope. Belle stopped walking, arrested by the sheer power of what she was seeing. He's getting better, she murmured, moving closer to study the layering technique. Look at how he's built up the surface. You can see the history of the painting underneath the final image. It's like archaeology, like your palimpsest theory. Dominic moved to stand beside her. Exactly. Belle gestured to where ghost images were visible beneath the surface paint. He started with one idea, realized it wasn't working, painted over it, started again. Most artists try to hide that process. Holloway makes it visible. He's saying the journey toward the final image is as important as the image itself. A voice came from behind them, cultured and amused. Well, that's the most insightful reading of my work I've heard in months. Please tell me you're an art critic so I can quote you extensively. Belle spun to find a man in his early 40s watching them with warm interest. Paint under his fingernails silver, threading through dark hair, laugh lines around intelligent eyes. Ethan. Dominic's greeting was easy, familiar. This is Belle Hartley, artist, final year at Ashworth. Belle, Ethan Holloway, who apparently eavesdrops on private conversations. When those conversations are about my work, absolutely. Ethan extended a hand to Belle. Ashworth has a solid program. What's your focus? Painting primarily, oils, some mixed media. Belle's voice steadied as she fell into familiar professional territory. I'm working on my thesis series exploring concepts of witness and visibility, the difference between being seen and being observed. Ethan said immediately, That's ambitious. How are you approaching it technically? They fell into conversation the way artists do, technical and passionate. Ethan showed them through the rest of his new series, explaining his process, and Belle found herself challenging some of his choices, defending others, dissecting technique with the kind of granular attention she usually reserved for studio critiques. I meant what I said on the phone, Ethan told her eventually. Come by the studio Tuesday. I want to see what you're working on. Other guests had begun arriving. Small clusters of serious collectors, gallery owners, people who moved through the space with confidence. Belle recognized a couple of names from Underworld publications, felt herself starting to withdraw into observer mode, but Dominic's hand found the small of her back steady and grounding. Don't disappear on me. His voice was quiet. You belong here as much as anyone. A woman in head-to-toe designer approached her, smile sharp and assessing. Dominic, darling, I didn't expect to see you here. Cassandra? Dominic's response was polite but without warmth. This is Belle Hartley, Belle Cassandra Whitmore, gallery owner. Cassandra's eyes swept over Belle with the kind of evaluation that catalogued and dismissed in seconds. How lovely. Are you a collector? An artist. Oh, how wonderful. Cassandra's smile didn't reach her eyes. What do you do, dear? Watercolors, oils, primarily. Large-scale figurative work exploring themes of transformation and witness. How ambitious. Well, if you ever want a show in a real gallery, do let me know. Though I have to warn you, the market for emerging artists is quite challenging right now. It takes more than talent to succeed. Before Belle could respond, Dominic's voice cut through with cold precision. Belle's work is already spoken for. I've purchased her thesis piece for my private collection, and Ethan's expressed interest in seeing the rest of her series, which I suspect will lead to more opportunities than your gallery typically provides emerging artists. Cassandra's expression flickered before she drifted away. Belle turned to Dominic with exasperation and gratitude tangled together. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did. Dominic's jaw was tight. Watching her dismiss you, that ends my tolerance. I can handle condescending gallery owners. You shouldn't have to. Dominic's dark eyes met hers. Let me be angry on your behalf, Belle. You've spent 3 years being gracious about systematic dismissal. Tonight, let someone else carry that weight. The offer was surprisingly intimate. Not to fight her battles, but to share the burden of fighting them. Okay, she whispered. Thank you. They spent another hour at the gallery. Belle discussing technique with other artists, Dominic staying nearby, but giving her space to engage professionally. When they finally left, stepping out into the cold February night, Belle felt energized in a way she hadn't experienced in months. That was incredible, she said as Dominic held the car door open. Thank you for bringing me. You earned your place there. Dominic slid in beside her. I just provided the introduction. The car pulled away from the curb, and Belle realized she didn't want the night to end. "Are you hungry?" Dominic asked, as if reading her thoughts. "There's a place in the village that makes pasta Ray actually approves of. I'm still wearing paint-stained jeans." "Perfect. It's that kind of place." The restaurant was small and warm, tucked into a side street. The owner greeted Dominic by name, led them to a corner table. Wine arrived that tasted like liquid sunlight. Belle took a careful sip, hyper-aware that this felt like a date despite everything. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why me?" Belle set down her glass. "And before you say it's about the art, I mean, yes, you bought my painting, but this feels like more than patronage. You're investing time, attention, introducing me to people." "Why?" Dominic was quiet for a moment, swirling wine in his glass. "Because when I caught you falling," he said finally, "you looked up at me with these eyes that were terrified and grateful and still trying to figure out how to be strong. And something in that look reminded me of every time I've been in over my head, trying to keep fighting, even when everything was giving up. I saw myself in you, Belle. Not who I am now, but who I was at 24, and I thought what would have happened if someone had caught me then. Someone did help you, though. I built what I have through violence and ruthlessness and doing things I'm not proud of because I had no other options." Dominic's voice was low, honest. "I hurt people. I made choices that kept me alive but cost me pieces of who I could have been. And when I look at you, at your talent, your determination, your refusal to compromise, even when you're starving, I think maybe I can give you the options I never had. That's a lot of pressure. To be your redemption arc. You're not my redemption." Dominic's dark eyes held hers. "You're just someone I want to help because I can. Because you deserve it. And because watching you create is the closest I've come to understanding what beauty without violence looks like." Food arrived, saving Belle from having to respond to words that felt too big, too honest. They ate and talked about safer things. Ethan's technique, Belle's thesis timeline, Ray's ongoing campaign to make sure she ate properly. But the conversation Dominic had started hung between them, shifting everything. By the time they finished eating, Belle had made a decision that was probably reckless but felt necessary. "Come back to my studio." The words came out before she could second-guess them. "There's something I want to show you, something I haven't shown anyone else yet." Dominic's expression shifted, something fierce and pleased moving through his careful control. "Are you sure?" "No," Belle admitted, "but I'm doing it anyway." The drive back to Washington Heights felt charged with anticipation. Belle was hyper-aware of Dominic beside her, of the risk she was taking, of how much she wanted him to understand. Her apartment was cold when they entered. Belle turned on her space heater and work lights moved to the corner where she'd been storing her newest piece. The canvas showed two figures, the space between them charged with tension and possibility. One reaching out, one caught between pulling away and leaning in. "This is new." Dominic's voice was quiet, reverent. "Since Tuesday?" "Since you," Belle corrected. "Since you asked to watch me work. Since you saw my studio and didn't see poverty, you saw persistence. Since you made me remember that maybe being caught isn't the same as being trapped." Dominic moved closer, studying the canvas with complete focus. "What do you call it?" Belle hadn't named it yet, but the answer came easily. "The space between falling and being caught, where you decide whether to trust the arms reaching for you." "And which one are you in this painting?" "Both," Belle said. "Neither. I'm the space between them. The moment before choice becomes action." Dominic turned to face her, and suddenly they were very close, the air between them electric with everything unsaid. Belle could feel his breath, could see the careful restraint in how he held himself, could sense him waiting for permission he refused to take without invitation. "I'm terrified of you." The words slipped out. "Of what you represent. Of how much I want to trust this." "Good." Dominic's voice was low and rough. "Fear means you're paying attention. But Belle, I need you to hear this. Whatever this is between us, it moves at your pace on your terms. Always. What if my terms include wanting you closer?" Belle's heart was racing. "What if I'm tired of fighting this because it seems complicated and dangerous? Then I'd say sometimes the best things are complicated and dangerous. Dominic's control was visibly straining. But I need to know you're sure that this isn't gratitude or... Belle stepped into the space between them, closing the distance he'd been so carefully maintaining. She reached up her paint-stained fingers, touching his jaw, feeling muscle jump beneath her touch. I'm sure. The kiss started slow, tentative, testing. Dominic's hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. Then something shifted. The careful control he'd been maintaining cracked, and the kiss deepened, became something more urgent, more honest. Belle's hands gripped his sweater, pulling him closer. He tasted like wine and something darker, more dangerous. His other hand slid into her hair, holding her as if she were something precious and breakable and absolutely essential. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Dominic rested his forehead against hers. That changes things. Yes. Belle's voice was unsteady. It does. They stood like that, foreheads touching, breath mixing, neither willing to step back and break the moment. Outside, the city continued its relentless motion, but inside Belle's tiny studio, time felt suspended. Stay, Belle heard herself say. Not for anything except this. Just stay a little longer. Dominic pulled her to the second-hand couch, settled her against his side with careful tenderness. They sat in comfortable silence, Belle's head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, watching the city lights through her single large window. Tell me about the first painting you ever made. Dominic's voice was quiet. The one that made you know this was what you wanted to do. Belle smiled against his shoulder. I was 7. My mom was working a double shift at the hospital and my dad was grading papers. I was bored, so I took all his red correction pens and drew on the bathroom wall. This elaborate scene of a dragon fighting a knight, except the knight was also a dragon, and they were fighting over a library. A library I liked books. Belle laughed softly. My dad found it, and instead of being angry, he just stood there staring at it for like 5 minutes. Then he got his camera and took pictures before he made me help paint over it. He said, Belle, if you're going to make art, at least make it on something we don't have to paint over. Next day he brought home 100 sheets of paper and a set of markers. He saw you. He did. Belle's throat tightened. They both did. My parents worked themselves to exhaustion to give me opportunities. The guilt of that, of not being able to pay them back yet. You will. Dominic's arm tightened around her. Not because you owe them, but because that's who you are. Someone who finishes what they start, who transforms struggle into something beautiful. They talked for hours about art and ambition and the complicated relationship between creating beauty and surviving poverty, about Dominic's father and the docks and the weight of inheriting a world built on violence and loyalty, about Ray, who'd saved Dominic's life when he was 15 and had been his moral compass ever since. It was nearly midnight when Dominic's phone buzzed insistently. He glanced at it and something shifted in his expression. A closing off, a return to the controlled man who commanded rooms and built empires. I have to go. The regret in his voice was genuine. Something's come up that needs my immediate attention. Dangerous something, complicated something. Dominic stood, helped Belle to her feet. Not dangerous for me, but requiring my presence to keep it that way. He pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her forehead. Lock the door behind me. I'll text you when I'm done to make sure you're okay. I've been locking my own door for years. Humor me anyway. At the door, Dominic paused, turned back. Belle, tonight was perfect. All of it. Thank you for trusting me enough to let me in. Thank you for being worth the risk. After he left, Belle locked the door and stood in the center of her studio trying to process everything that had happened. The gallery, the dinner, the kiss that had shifted something fundamental in her universe. She cleaned her brushes, covered her palette, looked at the painting of 2 figures reaching across space. Her phone buzzed. Dominic made it to the meeting. Missing your studio already. Sleep well, artist. Belle smiled, climbed into bed with her lips still tingling and her mind spinning with everything that had changed. She fell asleep thinking about the space between falling and being caught, and how sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stop bracing for impact and trust the arms reaching for you. Friday morning arrived with weak winter sunlight and Belle's phone ringing insistently. She answered groggily, expecting Dominic. "Belle Hartley?" a professional female voice asked. "Yes. This is Dr. Patterson. I treated you last week at Mr. Steele's residence. I'm calling because there's been an incident. Mr. Steele asked me to contact you immediately." Belle's blood went cold, sleep vanishing instantly. "What kind of incident is he hurt?" "He's stable, but he was involved in an altercation early this morning after his meeting last night. He's refusing proper medical treatment until he speaks with you. Can you come to the penthouse?" Belle was already pulling on clothes, her hands shaking. "I'm on my way." She threw on jeans and a sweater, grabbed her jacket, ran down 4 flights of stairs with her heart hammering. The morning was brutally cold, but Belle barely felt it as she caught a taxi, gave the driver Dominic's address, silently willed the car to move faster through traffic. Her mind raced with worst-case scenarios, with guilt that whatever Dominic had walked into was somehow connected to her, with the realization that the danger he'd mentioned wasn't theoretical anymore. The careful world he'd built around her, the penthouse, the gallery showings, the gentle courtship, had hidden the violence underneath. But violence, she was learning, always found its way to the surface eventually. Ray met her at the penthouse door, his usually jovial face drawn and worried. "He's in his bedroom. Stubborn fool won't let the doctor work properly." "What happened?" Belle's voice came out thin, afraid. Ray's expression darkened with something that looked like rage barely contained. "Victor Brennan happened. Dominic's underboss. The one who's been causing problems for months, trying to take territory that isn't his. He finally made his move last night." Belle's stomach dropped. "Is Dominic alive? Angry? Refusing to acknowledge he's hurt badly enough to need stitches?" Ray's hand on her shoulder was gentle despite his obvious fury. "Go. Maybe he'll listen to you." Belle found Dominic in his bedroom, shirtless, with Dr. Patterson trying to treat a vicious cut across his ribs while he argued on his phone in Italian, his voice hard and cold in a way Belle had never heard before. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face softened immediately. "Ti richiamo." He ended the call. "Belle, what happened?" She crossed to him, her artist's eye cataloging the damage with clinical horror. Bruises blooming across his torso in shades of purple and black, scraped knuckles split and raw. The cut Dr. Patterson was stitching deep enough that Belle could see muscle beneath. "Victor ambushed me." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "3 of his men jumped me outside the meeting. They wanted to send a message about territory disputes. By beating you half to death, by trying." Dominic winced as Dr. Patterson pulled another stitch. "They're in worse shape. I made sure of that." Belle felt something cold settle in her chest. This was the violence he'd mentioned, the ruthlessness, the world he'd tried to keep separate from galleries and wine and conversations about art. But there was no separation, she realized. It was all the same world, all the same man, Dr. Patterson. "Could you give us a moment?" Belle's voice was steadier than she felt. The doctor looked to Dominic, who nodded. She stepped out, closing the door quietly behind her. Belle sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to jar his injuries. "Tell me the truth. All of it. Why did Victor really attack you?" Dominic was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize it before everything fell apart. "Victor knows about you. He saw us at the gallery Thursday night. And he's the kind of man who uses leverage however he can find it." The implications settled over Belle like ice water. "I'm a target now. Because of you." "Yes." Dominic didn't soften, it didn't try to minimize. "Which is why I'm assigning you full security detail. 24/7 protection, starting immediately." Belle's independence flared hot and immediate. "You can't just decide I can and I will." Dominic's voice went hard, brooking no argument. "This isn't negotiable, Belle. Victor has already proven he's willing to use violence. Last night's message wasn't just about territory, it was about you. He told me specifically that I'd made myself weak by caring about something he could break." The words hung between them, brutal and honest. "So what do we do?" Belle asked quietly. "You assign me bodyguards and we just..." "What, pretend this is normal?" "No." Dominic reached for her hand, his grip careful despite the violence still humming through him. We acknowledge that my world is dangerous, that people like Victor will always see anyone I care about as leverage, and then you decide if that's something you can live with. His dark eyes held hers, and Belle saw the fear underneath his control. The expectation that she would leave, that this would be too much, that the violence he'd tried to shield her from would drive her away. Or, Belle said slowly, or I stay, and you teach me how to exist in your world without becoming a liability. Something fierce and vulnerable flickered across Dominic's face. You understand what you're saying? The complications, the danger, the fact that men like Victor will always be circling looking for weakness? I understand that every choice has a cost. Belle squeezed his hand gently, mindful of his scraped knuckles. And I'm choosing you anyway, not despite the complications, because I'd rather face them with you than be safe without you. You're either very brave or completely insane, probably both. Belle managed a small smile. But I'm not walking away, Dominic. You caught me when I was falling. Now I'm choosing to catch you back. Dominic pulled her carefully onto the bed beside him, settling her against his uninjured side with a tenderness that contrasted sharply with the evidence of violence covering his body. There are rules if you stay. His voice was quiet but absolute. Security detail, non-negotiable. You tell me immediately if anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you, if you notice anything unusual. You let me protect you even when your independence chafes. And Belle, he tilted her face up to meet his eyes. You have to trust that when I do violent things, when I make decisions that seem harsh or extreme, it's because I've seen what happens when you hesitate in my world, when you show mercy to people who have none. I trust you, Belle said simply. I don't have to understand everything about your world to trust that you're doing what you think is necessary to keep people safe. Not people. Dominic's thumb traced her jaw. You. I'm trying to keep you safe. Everyone else is just strategy. The raw honesty in his words made Belle's breath catch. Then teach me. Teach me how to move through your world without being a target. Teach me what to watch for, what to avoid, how to protect myself when you can't be there. Make me a partner instead of a liability. Dominic studied her face for a long moment, and Belle could see him weighing options, calculating risks, deciding whether to pull her deeper into his dangerous world or push her away to safety. Okay, he said finally, but we start with basics. Ray will teach you situational awareness. Marcus, my driver, will teach you defensive driving, and I'll teach you about the families, the territories, the politics that govern everything. Belle nodded, settling more comfortably against him. When do we start? After you let Dr. Patterson finish stitching me up. Dominic's mouth curved slightly. And after you eat whatever breakfast Ray's making. I can smell it from here, and he'll be devastated if you refuse. The door opened and Ray appeared with a tray loaded with food, Dr. Patterson trailing behind him. The stubborn fool will let you work now, Ray told the doctor, setting the tray on the bedside table. And you, Bellissima, will eat while he gets stitched. No arguments from either of you. Belle ate while Dr. Patterson finished her work cleaning and bandaging Dominic's injuries with professional efficiency. Ray hovered, muttering in Italian about young people and their complete disregard for self-preservation, but his eyes were warm when they landed on Belle. You're good for him, Ray said quietly while Dominic was distracted by the doctor. First time in 10 years I've seen him care about something more than strategy and survival. I'm terrified I'm going to get him killed. Kara. Ray's hand was gentle on her shoulder. He was dead already before you. Just still walking around. You brought him back to life. Whatever comes next, that's worth the risk. Dr. Patterson finished her work and packed up her supplies. Keep the wounds clean and dry. Change the dressings twice daily. No strenuous activity for at least a week. Dominic opened his mouth to argue, but Belle cut him off. He'll follow your instructions. I'll make sure of it. After the doctor left, Belle helped Dominic into a clean shirt, her fingers gentle over his bandages. So what happens now? With Victor. Now I make it very clear that touching you means war. Dominic's voice was cold-controlled. Victor thinks he can pressure me into giving up territory by threatening people I care about. He's about to learn that was a catastrophic miscalculation. Will you kill him? The blunt question hung in the air between them. Belle needed to know, needed to understand exactly what she was choosing. If he comes after you again? Yes. Dominic met her eyes without flinching, without hesitation. I've killed for less, Belle. I won't apologize for doing whatever's necessary to keep you safe. Belle absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. The man who'd caught her when she fell, who'd bought her art and fed her and kissed her with such careful tenderness, was also someone who could kill without hesitation. Both truths existed simultaneously. Both were real. Okay, she said quietly, but promise me something. Anything. Promise me you'll come back. That whatever you do to Victor, whatever war you start, you'll survive it and come back to me. Dominic pulled her close, careful of his injuries. I promise. His voice was rough with emotion. I've spent 10 years not caring whether I survived. Now I have a reason to make sure I do. They stayed like that, wrapped in each other, while Ray made concerned noises from the doorway and the city woke up outside floor-to-ceiling windows. Belle thought about the painting in her studio, the space between falling and being caught. She thought that space was about trust, about choosing to let someone hold you. But she understood now that it was also about choosing to hold them back, about catching and being caught, existing in the same moment, neither passive nor active, but something more complicated, something that required both people to reach across the space between them and decide the risk was worth it. The risk of violence, the risk of love, the risk of being seen completely and choosing each other anyway. That afternoon, while Dominic made calls from his bed and strategized with Ray about Victor, Belle stood in front of her canvas in his guest room. He'd insisted she stay at the penthouse until the Victor situation was resolved, and started painting. Not the figures reaching anymore. Something new, something truer. Two people standing back to back, facing different directions but connected at the center. One facing toward light and color and beauty. One facing toward shadow and violence and necessity. Both holding the space between them steady, both refusing to let go. She titled it, Ours. 3 days later, Victor Brennan was found dead in a warehouse in Red Hook. Officially a gang dispute over territory. Unofficially, everyone in Dominic's world knew exactly what the message meant. Touch. What's his pay with your life? Belle didn't ask for details. Didn't want to know exactly how it happened or who pulled the trigger. Some things she was learning were better left in the shadows where they belonged. What she did know was that Dominic came back to the penthouse that night with blood on his knuckles and violence in his eyes, and she'd held him while the adrenaline faded and the man she loved came back to the surface. You're still here, he'd whispered against her hair, as if he couldn't quite believe it. Where else would I be anywhere safe? Anywhere that isn't covered in my blood. Belle had pulled back, framed his face with her hands, made him look at her. I don't want safe. I want you. All of you. The parts that create beauty and the parts that do violence when necessary. I'm choosing all of it. Why? Because you caught me when I was falling. Belle's voice was steady, certain. And now you're mine. Mine to heal. Mine to choose. Mine to build a life with, however complicated that life becomes. Dominic had kissed her then, desperate and grateful and absolutely certain. Ours. He'd whispered against her mouth. You were always ours. 2 months later, Belle's thesis exhibition opened at Ashworth Academy to critical acclaim that surprised even her professors. Between Shadows commanded attention from collectors and critics who suddenly wanted to know everything about the unknown artist behind such technically masterful, emotionally resonant work. Dominic had been there for the opening, standing slightly apart from the crowd, but present in a way that steadied Belle when the attention threatened to overwhelm her. He'd watched her navigate conversations with gallery owners and potential buyers, had seen her hold her ground when people tried to diminish her vision. Ethan Holloway came too, bringing with him the kind of endorsement that opened doors Belle hadn't known existed. He'd stood in front of her thesis series for 20 minutes, then turned to her with serious eyes. You're the real thing. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The painting Dominic had purchased between Shadows stayed in the exhibition until closing night, then was delivered to his penthouse where it hung in his bedroom, the first thing he saw every morning and the last thing before sleep. Ray had cried when he saw it, muttering in Italian about young people and their complete inability to see their own extraordinary talent. 6 months after the night Belle collapsed at the Vandermeer Hotel, she stood in a Brooklyn loft that Dominic had helped her find 2,000 square feet of perfect northern light in a neighborhood that was still affordable for emerging artists, but starting to attract galleries. Her studio, her space where she could create without being cramped. But she still spent most nights at the penthouse, still woke up wrapped in Dominic's arms, still had breakfast with Ray, still navigated the complicated world of being in love with someone whose life existed partly in shadows. She'd learned the politics of the families, the territories, the careful balance Dominic maintained. She'd learned defensive driving from Marcus and situational awareness from Ray, and how to move through Dominic's world without being a target. She'd learned that violence was sometimes necessary, and that the man she loved carried the weight of that necessity like a cross. And she'd learned that love wasn't simple or safe or easy, that choosing someone meant choosing all of them, light and shadow, beauty and violence, the parts that created and the parts that destroyed. One evening in August, Dominic appeared at her studio with unusual tension in his shoulders. Belle set down her brushes, immediately recognizing something significant in his bearing. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong." Dominic crossed to her, took her paint-stained hands in his. "Belle, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Are you happy? Here with me in this life we've built?" Belle studied his face, seeing the vulnerability underneath the control. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm happy. It's complicated and sometimes scary, and not at all what I imagined my life would look like. But I'm happy." "Why?" Dominic reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a small box. "Because I want to make it permanent. I want to marry you. I want to wake up every morning for the rest of my life, knowing you chose me despite everything. That you caught me back when I was falling. That we're building something neither of us could have built alone." He opened the box, revealed a ring that was somehow both elegant and artistic, a raw diamond set in brushed platinum, unconventional and perfect. "I know my world is dangerous. I know there will always be complications, always be threats, always be violence at the edges. But Belle, you make me want to be better than I am. You make me remember that there's beauty worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth choosing every single day." Belle felt tears streaming down her face, joy and certainty and overwhelming love flooding through her. "Yes. Yes." Dominic's voice was rough with emotion. "Yes, I'll marry you." Belle laughed through her tears. "Yes to waking up together every morning. Yes to building something neither of us could build alone. Yes to all of it, the beauty and the violence and the complications and the love." Dominic slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility, and the kind of love that transformed everything it touched. When they finally broke apart, both crying and laughing, Belle pressed her forehead against his. "Ours," she whispered. "Always ours." Dominic agreed. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony at Ray's restaurant, the one he'd opened with money Dominic had invested years ago when Ray had saved his life and refused any repayment except the promise that Dominic would remember where he came from. Ethan Holloway came and gave a toast about the importance of being witnessed fully. Belle's parents flew in from Pennsylvania, and her father cried when he walked her down the makeshift aisle. Ray sobbed through the entire ceremony and served food that made even the most hardened of Dominic's associates weep with pleasure. And through it all, Belle felt the steady presence of Dominic beside her. Dangerous and gentle, powerful and vulnerable, exactly the man she'd chosen. The man who'd caught her when she was falling and then let himself be caught in return. Her career continued to flourish. Major galleries began courting her for representation. Critics discussed her work in terms usually reserved for established masters. She was invited to prestigious residencies and interviewed for art magazines. The Museum of Modern Art acquired Between Shadows for their permanent collection 2 years after their wedding validation that still made Belle's chest tight with disbelief and joy. but success was sweeter shared with someone who understood both the triumph and the cost. Dominic celebrated every achievement with genuine pride, never diminishing her accomplishments, always seeing her as an artist first and his wife second. And Belle learned to exist in his world without losing herself, learned that being loved by someone dangerous meant accepting both the protection and the violence that came with it. Learned that marriage to Dominic meant sometimes sleeping alone when he had to handle situations she couldn't be part of, and trusting that he would always come back. 3 years after the night she'd collapsed at the Vandermeer Hotel, Belle stood in the Museum of Modern Art, looking at Between Shadows hanging on a wall, alongside works by artists she'd studied in school. Dominic stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, watching her take in this moment of arrival. "Do you ever think about that night?" Belle asked quietly. "Wonder what would have happened if you hadn't caught me every day," Dominic admitted. "And every day I'm grateful that whatever instinct made me move fast enough to reach you was awake and paying attention." Belle leaned against him, studying her painting with fresh eyes, the figure suspended between breaths, between moments, between what was and what would be. It captured something true about transformation. How terrifying and necessary it was, how you couldn't become who you were meant to be without being willing to fall. But the painting was incomplete now, she realized. It showed the falling, but not the catching. It showed the moment of suspension, but not the hands reaching up to hold steady. "I want to make something new," she said suddenly. "A companion piece. This one shows the falling. The next one should show the catch. The moment when trust becomes action. When someone decides you're worth the risk of reaching for." Dominic pulled her closer. "I'd like to see that. It's going to be complicated, technically challenging. I'll need to figure out how to show the transfer of weight, the shift from falling to being held, how to make visible the exact moment when catastrophe becomes grace." "Sounds perfect." Dominic's voice was warm. "Sounds exactly like us." And as they stood together in the museum, Belle's painting hanging as proof that impossible things could happen if you were willing to trust the fall, she thought about the years ahead, the new work she would create, the life she and Dominic were building together, complicated and honest, and built on the foundation of being completely seen. She'd been invisible once, ground down by poverty and exhaustion and the relentless calculation of survival. She'd fallen in a ballroom full of Manhattan's elite, and one dangerous, generous, impossible man had caught her. Everything after that had been learning to trust that the catch was real, that being seen was safe, that love could exist alongside complexity and danger and still be worth every risk. Belle Hartley had fallen. Dominic Steele had caught her. And together they'd transformed that moment into something neither of them could have created alone, a partnership built on witness and trust, and the radical act of choosing each other completely. It was the truest thing she'd ever painted. It was the bravest thing she'd ever done. And it was only the beginning of everything they would build together, one brushstroke, one caught moment, one deliberate choice at a time. Ours, they would say, when people asked how they'd found each other. Just ours. Simple and complicated and exactly right.